to the break of dawn. There we go. Good job. Good job. Good job. All right. Thank you. I'm going to tell you a story that happened probably a few years before you were born. Do you remember it? No? Okay. Just making sure. It was way back in the year 1988. Now, I was actually kind of old by then, so it wasn't that far back for me, but for you guys, that was just before you were born, and it was in a country on the other side of the world named called Armenia. Well, it was time for little Armand to go to school. He was just a youngster, just so little. I think he was in first grade. Anybody here still in first grade? I don't think so. I think most of y'all are older than that, and some of you are just not quite there yet. And he was in first grade, I believe, as one of the early grades, and he was going to walk to school. Yeah. How would you like that? Would you like to have to walk to school? He had to go uphill in the snow, but no. Anyway, he was going to walk to school, and his daddy got down on his knee right before him and got right eye level, and he told him, he said, Armand, no matter what happens, I will always be there for you. Now, that was a promise. You think Armand's going to believe his daddy? Oh, yeah. If Papa says he's going to be there for him, he's going to be there. And so he goes off to school, and they are in school when all of a sudden an earthquake hits. Now, this wasn't just a little tiny earthquake where things fall off the shelves. This was a big earthquake where the whole building collapsed. All of the bricks and the beams and everything, the whole school came crashing down. And it was over the news, and it was hit everywhere that there were thousands of kids who had been killed at the school. Well, Samuel heard this on the news, and he couldn't believe his ears. He is trying to call the school to get information about his son Armand, but he can't get any information. He can't get through. Everything has collapsed. And so he goes down to the school. Now, there were already a lot of parents at the school, and they were very sad for their children. They are looking around, and everything is just demolished. These bricks are broken, and the beams and everything, the whole thing is just crushed down. And is there any chance that kids can live underneath all of that broken beams and rock? I mean, it was the most sad sight they had ever seen. And many of the parents are crying and talking about how much they love their child and they miss their child forever. And Samuel found the spot where his son's classroom used to be. And he goes over there and he grabs a hold of a beam that has broken, and he goes and shoves it with all he has to get it out of the way. Then he takes up a big rock. He picks that and he moves it, and he goes back for another. And one of the parents says, "What are you doing? The building is unstable. It's not safe. You're going to make things worse." But what did Samuel promise Armand? He would be there for him. And so he began to work and to clear this away. And one parent after another had told him to leave it alone, but he kept trying. And finally, most of the parents were gone. There was a worker that was there, and he tried to tell him to stop. And you know what he told that worker? Would you please help me? Think the worker would help him? What's he doing it for? It's useless. It's not worth doing. And he left. And now nightfall came, and Samuel kept working. He kept pulling out these big rocks and the big blocks, and he was digging in there and doing all that he could. And every now and then he'd call out his son's name. All night long, he worked all by himself. It was tomorrow now, and he's still working. Think he should probably go take a nap, get some sleep, maybe go eat a little bit or go to the bathroom? No. His son was in that building, and he was going to do whatever it took to get to him. And so he kept working. He had a huge pile of rocks and beams out of the way already, and a bunch of parents came back, and they were bringing pictures of their children, flowers, and they were putting them out for display for others to see who they were mourning and who they were crying for. But Samuel didn't pay them any mind. He kept working, and he was trying so hard to get to his son. And he picked up this beam, and he shoves it out of the way. And as he did, he heard a sound. He heard a kid cry out. And he calls out, Armand! Armand, are you there? Armand! And he hears, Papa? Is that you? Papa? Now he's working really hard. Now he has renewed energy. Now he knows his son is alive. And he's taking up these rocks and he's picking up with all he has. And he's putting them aside and he gets a nice little hole there. And he sees little Armand in there and he says, Armand, come on out. And Armand says, no. I know that you're here for me. I know that you won't leave me alone. I told my friends that you promised to be here and that you would never break your promise. So I'm going to let my friends come out first. And one by one, the kids started climbing out of the hole that he had made for them. Until finally, little Armand comes out. God has made a promise to us, hasn't he? He's made a promise that he's going to prepare a place in heaven for us and that he will come back for us and take us home so that no matter what disaster, no matter what we face here in this world, we know that we can trust him to keep that promise and that he's coming back for us. All right, you can go back to your seats. Go back to Papa. Thank you, Maddie. Beautiful, beautiful song. I love the message of that song. Prepare me to be a sanctuary. God's promise is that He will live in us. Prepare me to be that sanctuary. Ah, what a message. Thank you, Maddie. God sent Samuel to the home of Jesse to talk to one of his sons and to anoint him to be the next king. Son after son stood before Samuel, thought the oldest one would be it, thought the next one, and all the way down until he had to say, are there not yet any more sons? Oh, yeah, I've got one out in the field, Jesse had said, but, he's just a small child. Go get him. And he came in, and the Lord said, that is him. That is the one that will be the next king. Anoint him. And David was promised right then and there as a youngster that God had a special purpose in his life. He was promised that God would lead him and that he would be the next king. And yet, step after step, chapter after chapter, till we've covered a whole book of the Bible, we have found challenges for David to receive that promise. He had gone through so many trials, so many tribulations. The king himself was seeking after David's life, sending armies out to get him. David feared that his next step would be his last step. He had gone to the enemy of God's people. He had fled to the Philistines, looking anywhere he could, looking for some hope, some relief from the constant barrage of challenges and temptations and trials and persecutions. God has made a promise to His people. He has promised us that He loves us. He has promised us that He has made us to be kings and priests unto Him. He has promised that He will never leave us nor forsake us. And yet it's so easy to get caught up in all of the trials, all of the problems of this world, and to forget that our God keeps His promises. To forget that we're not walking this alone, but that we are walking every day, every step of the way. We are walking in the hands of God, and that He will protect His own, and that He is providing a place for us and will come back for us. This world is not all that we have, but we are looking for a better country. One that is not made and run by thieves and those who would corrupt, but run by God Himself, that is built by God Himself, that is prepared for His people by God Himself. A better country, a better home. David had made a mistake in going to the Philistines. He had to lie. He was having to be deceitful the whole time he was there. And all of these raids and the different things came back upon him, and yet God worked out His will in David's life. Even while he was over there, God had worked through him to get him out of there so that he would not be a part of that battle. That last great battle that we see in 1 Samuel chapter 31, that Saul and Jonathan and all of his family are killed in. If David had been a part fighting against that, then it would have been David who would have been blamed for this. But God had preserved him and taken him out of there. And now we find that in the very next chapter, 2 Samuel chapter 1, that David laments the death of Saul, the death of Jonathan, of his family. And he is crying out and in distress because he had loved Jonathan so much. Chapter 2, 2 Samuel. David, it happens, verse 1, that after this, that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? I love this. Because David earlier, several chapters back, when there was a challenge, when there was a problem, he inquired of the Lord. In fact, that was a sermon title one week. Because over and over through that chapter, when he didn't know where to go, where he didn't know where to turn, he inquired of the Lord. He found his answer. It was when he didn't inquire of the Lord and he went after the Philistines and he went at the different directions that he should not have been, that he found himself in trouble. But chapter 2, verse 1, it happened that he inquired of the Lord. Shall I go up? The Lord says, go up. And David says, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. Now, wouldn't you like to ask God where he wants you to go? And to get a specific answer like this. I mean, I have been in spots where I've been challenged with this. I remember being down in South Louisiana, and this was right after we had been ordained, and you start getting calls from all these different conferences at that time period, and it's a very confusing time in a young minister's life. And I got a call from upstate New York. I kind of laughed about it because there's probably 5 million pastors between where I was at and where I was getting the call that would have been more qualified than me. Why should I go from South Louisiana to upstate New York? And I prayed about it, and the call just wouldn't go away. And this was one of those that we deliberated over for a long time. 4 months it took to make that decision. When you're asking and you're pleading with God for an answer, 4 months seems like an eternity. But finally, we went. We told them we would come. The very next day after I told New York we would come, I received a call from Texas. My parents were in Corpus Christi, and they were needing a pastor, and my mom had put our name up there at the conference several times, and I've never sought after a call. If God wants me to be somewhere, that's where I want to be. I don't want to seek after a call. I want to know, God, where do you want? And so Texas Conference had not called during that whole time. The day after I told New York we would come, I received a call from Texas Conference. And they wanted to know if we would be interested in going to Corpus Christi. I knew my parents wanted us to go. Our whole life, our whole married life, we had been so far from any family. We'd been out in Utah. We've been in Arkansas. We've been in Louisiana. Our families were in Maryland and in Texas and then Florida. And we had never really been that close with our family, physically anyway, geographically speaking. And so, receiving a call one day after, I told him, I says, you know, we've been in prayer over this. And he says, we've been meaning to call you for the last couple weeks, but something just kept coming up. And I told him, I said, I'm going to have to assume that was God. Because I just accepted the call to New York yesterday. I wanted to be where God wanted me. And he told me right then and there on the phone, he says, you know, I've accepted calls before. I've been to places before, and I found that it wasn't what I was expecting. You get up to New York and you find this is not what you were expecting. We're going to keep this call open for you for a little while. We get up to New York. The church members had been looking for a place for us, and there was no place to be found. Our stuff is all still in the U-Haul. We're in a hotel room, and we receive word that our conference president has accepted the call to go and be the chair of the D-Min program at Andrews. One of the main reasons we had decided on going up there was that president was going to be training me on church planting. And I was very interested in this. I love taking the gospel and going forward with it. And so here we have opportunity to learn how to plant churches and to get things going from the beginning. And I knew this is not just something you just did. You needed to know what you were doing. And here we were going to get some specific training in this area, and I was excited about it. Now here we are. I mean, cold weather. I like it cool. But when it snows 11 and a half months of the year, anyone could get tired of that. And you look around at the faces of the people, and it was hard. It reminded me of when I had been in Russia and the hard look that they had. And I knew that this cold winter and what it would be like. And I'm looking at this and saying, now, wait a minute. We can't find a place to live. We can't find a place to go. Our stuff's in the U-Haul. U-Haul's calling saying they want their truck. And we're praying about this. Our president is gone. Where to turn? Texas Conference has kept the call open. Do you go back there? Church was still open where we had left. We could go back there. But we had been praying, seeking God for 4 months. And for 4 months, we had come to resolution. We were where God wanted us. And we knew that God would lead. And we stayed right there. And we saw the hand of God. We saw blessings from God and miracles open up. And homes weren't selling. In fact, taxes were so high up there that people couldn't afford to rent out houses. And I finally found a realtor that was willing to talk to some of his clients that had empty houses. You're not getting anything out of those. Why not rent them to us while they're on the market? Great. One of them finally agreed to it. So we had a house. It sold that month. Been on the market for I don't remember how long it had been. So we had to go to another house. And we got in that house, and guess what happened? Yeah, you're right. It sold too. 6 times that first year there we moved because the houses kept selling. And I told the realtor, I said, I want commission. We knew that the devil was out there to get us, and the challenges that we faced that year and some of the struggles that were there, and yet we also knew that the devil has been defeated. He has no power over the people of God. He cannot touch you. You belong to someone much more powerful. You belong to one who makes a promise and keeps that promise. And when God calls you, when God sends you forth and you go forth and you are obedient in His leading and you follow Him wherever He sends you, you can count on the fact that God will be with you and will carry you through. David has faced so many challenges, so many struggles, things that I've never had to deal with. And here he is inquiring of God, shall I go back to the people of God? Shall I go back to the promised land? Shall I go back to the people that you have told me that I am going to be the king of? Shall I go back? And God says, go back. Where to? Go to Hebron. And so David went up there. And his 2 wives also, notice this, his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the widow of Nabal. He had Michal at one point, but now he's got these 2 wives. These are his 2 wives. I'm going to emphasize that because the story changes. So he and his wives, his 600 men and their wives, their families, all that they had rescued in Ziklag that had been burned, they had now brought with them back up to Hebron. When they got to Hebron, the people were not surprised to see him. They were not caught off guard, but they had a party there waiting for him. The people greeted him with open arms, and they made him king in Judah right then and there. Because they also had been in prayer. Because there was a communication between them and God, and there's no other way they could have known this. Verse 8, but Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, Ephraim, over Benjamin, over all of Israel. And so you have David now being made king over Judah, and you have Abner putting Ishbosheth, Saul's son, in as king over the 11 tribes that were left. David has one. Saul's family is still ruling over the other 11. And there is a battle that takes place between Israel and Judah. Between Abner and really Joab and his brothers, verse 18 of chapter 2, you have Joab and Abishai and Asahel. Now, God had made the promise to David. He had told him that he would be king over Israel. God had made the promise that Saul and his family, as Saul has rejected God and has led his family astray, that they would be rejected, that they would not be in place. And yet David now has one tribe and Saul still has the other 11, or at least his family. And this battle begins to happen. God always wins. If you want to know which side to get on, I can tell you what the end of the story is. I've read the book of Revelation. If you want to know which side's going to win, always stay with God. He is powerful. He is all-knowing. He is ever-present. He is there for you. And His promise is faithful. His promise is true. He will deliver you. David stayed faithful to God. His men, his leaders, his warriors found victory after victory. And as the battle waxed on, Abner fled before them. Well, Asahel was quick. It says he was like a gazelle. And he chased after Abner. Now, Abner was a man of war, a man of valor, and he turns and he says, "Is that you, Asahel? That you? I mean, who else could be running this fast and keeping up with me? Is that you?" "Yes." "Well, turn aside. You want your victory? Grab some armor from someone else. Grab all of this. Turn left or right, whichever way you want to go. Do something else, but don't follow me." But he kept going. He says, "Why should I kill you? Turn away from me." But Asahel refused to turn away, and so Abner, we'll spare you the gory details, killed him right then and there. This, of course, made Joab very angry. Angry at him for what he had done to his brother. And he sought after revenge, and he went to go do it. And, of course, it was Abner who turned him away from it. Chapter 3. There was a king, 2 Samuel 3. There was, a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. This is rather an interesting story to me because Abner knew God's promise to David. He knew that David was promised by God that he would be king, yet Abner took it upon himself to make one of Saul's sons king. He is now getting all of Israel together, and they're all battling against David and against Judah, and they have finding themselves powerless against David and David's God. Who was Israel? This is the people of God. This is God's chosen people, and yet he is finding himself battling against it. Meanwhile, David is getting stronger and stronger, and you're finding that all of this victory, David seems to have some extra time on his hands. In the midst of all of this fighting and in the midst of everything going on, you see in verses 2 through 5 that David has 6 sons from 6 different wives. he came to Hebron with 2 wives. Now there are 6 kids, and how long is David in Hebron? It says in chapter 2, verse 11, he was there for 7.5 years. So in 7.5 years, David has 6 sons that are listed, besides all the daughters and the other sons that are not. There are 6 sons by 6 different wives in that 7.5 year time period. You would think that at some point, when you are trusting in God and you're following God and you're doing what God has called you to do, that you're not going to be trying to get the strength from every other direction you can and get these affiliations and marry into other nationalities to try to build up your kingdom, because it was God who gave him the promise. It was God who carried him through every step of the way, every challenge he had faced, and yet he forgot to trust solely in God, even in this very matter. It's incredible to me. So with all of this mistake, is God going to let him go? No, it continues. Meanwhile, Abner finds himself in trouble. Saul had a concubine there, name of Rizpah, and Ishbosheth, the king that Abner had put in place, says to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" To go into the king's concubine is to say that you are now king. Who was more powerful, Abner or Ishbosheth? Clearly it was Abner. He is the one that set him up. He's the one who put him in place. He is the one who led the armies. It was Abner who had all of this experience to make everything happen that he was doing. And now Ishbosheth, I don't know if it's jealousy, I don't know if it was false rumors or whatever it was, but he now accuses Abner. He don't like it. Whether it's true or false, it makes no difference. The fact is, the Bible doesn't even say whether it actually happened or didn't. But have you ever been falsely accused? Somebody just knows that you did something, and they tell you what they think of it, and there's nothing you can say that's going to change their mind. Abner decided he's not even going to try. He became so angry at him that he says, "Look, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. This is it. You are history. I'm going to turn to David." But I want you to notice what he says in detail here in verse 9. "May God do so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him." I wasn't making that up. Abner knew that God had promised the kingdom to David. He knew that that was a promise. He knew that that was a reality, and there's nothing that he as a mortal human could do to stop it. Now that Ishbosheth has made him so angry, he's switching sides. He's going to try to join in with David. And it's not just because he has some loyalty to God. It's not because he has some loyalty to David. It's because he wants to be a part of the winning side. He has selfish motives, selfish ambitions here. And as the story continues, you see some of these coming out. But he goes to David. And he says, "Look, I'll give you the kingdom." Those words sound familiar, don't they? Jackie asked us earlier about the first temptation of the devil talking to Jesus. Well, here's another one. "I'll give you the kingdom," the devil said to Jesus, "if you will bow down and worship me." Whoa. Abner is offering the kingdom to David. Who promised the kingdom to David? Back when he was just a shepherd boy, who promised that kingdom to him? It was God. Who carried him through challenge after challenge? Did he need Abner to make this happen? No, he didn't need Abner. He needed to trust in the one whom he had inquired of, shall I go up? Where shall I go? And God said, yes, go up. Go to Hebron. If he continued in those inquiries, if he continued talking to God, if he continued asking God for his leading, he wouldn't have had to face a lot of the sorrow that he was about to face here. But he accepts Abner's proposition. He says, but there's one little condition here. I want you to bring my wife back to me. Go get Micah, Saul's daughter. He's going to really strengthen the kingdom. He now has Saul's family. He has, as you read back here in verses 2 through 5, all of these other countries that these wives were from. He's now got all of this support. He's got his kingdom established as he does this. But who is really the one who established his kingdom? It was God. We could ask this question over and over again, and the answer is always going to be the same. It was God who made the promise, and it was God who would fulfill it. Every time we turn around, there's a temptation to strengthen our own stand. There's a temptation to strengthen or to tear down the barn and build bigger ones, as we talked about in Sabbath school. There is a temptation to make things safer for ourselves and to try to establish our kingdom here on earth, as it were. But the truth is, God is the one who made the promise. It is God who has said, I will establish you. I will prosper you. I will take care of you. You don't even have to worry about what you're going to eat or drink or where you're going to live or what you're going to wear. I will take care of you. And God has promised a better country. He has promised a better home, a place where there'll be no more sorrow, no more suffering. He has promised a place where there'll be no more accusations and no more people putting us down and fighting and bickering. And God has promised a place, a safety, a safe haven, a place where we will be with God and God will be with us, and we won't have to go through the curses of sin ever again. He has promised us something so much better, that we don't have to go through day after day worrying about the challenges, whether they're physical, mental health, or whatever they are, that we can now focus on a God who has promised to focus on us, to establish you as a king, as a priest, as a child of His, and you have eternity with no more sorrow to look forward to. The temptation is always there. Abner went out, got Michal, brought her back. Her husband follows weeping, and Abner threatens him, get out of here, or that'll be the last time you cry. He goes back home. David already has these 6 wives, these 6 sons, plus the others. Already got this going. Now he's got Micah as well. Meanwhile, Joab comes back from fighting a battle, finding victory for David, and he comes back and he hears that Abner had been in the court and that David had let him go away peaceably. This is the enemy. This is a sworn enemy, and here he's now let him in. He says, look, he's here to spy you out. I know the heart of Abner. I know what he's about. David wouldn't let him do anything about it, so Joab, of course, calls Abner back in. Here's his opportunity for vengeance. He calls Abner aside and kills him in the same way that he killed his brother. Gets his revenge. But David hears of it. Verse 28, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord forever. Of the blood of Abner and the son of Ner, let it rest on the head of Joab, even to the very day that David was on his deathbed late in life. He brings this story up. He calls back and recalls how Joab has killed Abner in the midst of, not in a battle, but just innocently. innocent blood he spills. And David gets onto him. And he condemns him for what he has done. And the whole country sees how David mourns over Abner. They all see his reaction. And they understood, verse 37, that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner. And the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince, a great man, has fallen this day in Israel? I am weak today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, talking here about Joab, Asahel, and I'm going to look his name up again, Abishai. These men of Zeruiah, too harsh for me. The Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. David didn't need conspiracies to establish his kingdom. He didn't need to have these uprisings and these people coming in and seeking after blood and seeking after revenge. David didn't need all of this stuff going on to establish his kingdom because God had promised to establish that kingdom. David wanted no part of that. He wanted Israel rather to put that kind of stuff aside and to focus on God. And so he mourns in the sight of all of Israel. And he calls upon God. And the promise of God has been realized. David has been made king. After all of this, it's taken us weeks just going through these stories. It took years in reality for this to happen. God has made a promise to each one of you, to each one of us. He has made a promise that he will deliver us, that he will establish us, that he will give us that kingdom that he is preparing for us. And he is coming again, even as he says he will. And God has made the promise that as we seek after that country, there were many who looked for the promise of the coming Redeemer who lived and died before Jesus came. There were many that didn't get to see this and realize the fulfillment of that promise, but they will when Jesus comes again. They will be resurrected and be able to see the promise of God firsthand. But now, they desired a better, that is a heavenly country. Hebrews 11:16. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. God has prepared a city for you. You are part of God's kingdom. It was God's desire to come to die for you, to redeem you back to himself. Whether you're sitting here today, listening in over the airwaves, wherever you are, there is a promise from God that he has redeemed you. Accept him as your Savior. Look for his promise to be fulfilled in you. And don't worry about the things and the challenges and the tribulations that come here in this world. All of that has been promised to take place. Don't look at how someone else will respond. Don't look to where someone else is. Look to your Redeemer. Look to the one who has promised to deliver you, and he will deliver you. Today, will you renew that dedication? Will you renew that commitment with him to let everything else, all of the distractions and the problems of this world go and focus on the one who has promised to redeem you, to restore you, to build a city for you? Will you focus on him and let him do the rest? Will you do that with me today?